July 9, 1968. Abyssinian Baptist Church, Harlem. 11:47 a.m. The preacher was mid-sentence when Frank Lucas stood up, and the entire funeral went silent. The church was packed. 300 mourners filling every pew, standing along the back wall, crowding the side aisles. Bumpy Johnson's casket sat at the altar surrounded by flowers, white lilies, red roses, arrangements sent by everyone who had ever benefited from Bumpy's protection or feared his reach. Bumpy Johnson. The man who had run Harlem for 30 years. Dead at 62. Heart attack. Gone. The power vacuum was immediate. Before Bumpy's body was even cold, the scramble had begun. Italian families moving in from downtown. Rival crews claiming territories. Police captains calling meetings with new potential partners. Everyone knew, whoever controlled Harlem's heroin trade would control millions. And Bumpy's throne was empty. Frank Lucas sat in the fifth row on the left side. He wore a charcoal suit, perfectly tailored, no jewelry, no flash. His face was composed. He'd been Bumpy's driver, his assistant, his quiet shadow for 15 years. People knew his name but not his reach. That was exactly how Frank wanted it. The preacher stood at the pulpit, Bible open, delivering the eulogy. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was a pillar of this community. A man who understood that power without principle is tyranny, and principle without power is philosophy. Frank stood. Not dramatically. Not with any announcement. He simply rose from his seat, picked up the brown leather bag that had been resting at his feet, and stepped into the center aisle. The preacher stopped talking. Every head in the church turned. Frank didn't look at them. He looked straight ahead at the casket. And he walked. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. Leather soles on marble floor. Measured. Unhurried. Each step deliberate. He reached the altar. The casket was closed. Bumpy had wanted it that way. Frank stood beside it for a moment, his hand resting gently on the polished wood. Then he placed the leather bag on the small table beside the flowers. He didn't open it. Didn't explain it. Didn't say a word. He looked at the preacher. Made eye contact. Nodded once. Then he turned and walked back down the aisle. The same measured pace. The same silence. He reached his pew, sat down, and folded his hands in his lap. The preacher cleared his throat. Continued the eulogy. But his voice was different now. Quieter. More careful. Because everyone in that church understood what had just happened. Frank Lucas had placed his offering. Not in the collection plate. On Bumpy's altar. In front of 300 witnesses. It was a coronation without a crown. A claim without a speech. Frank didn't argue. He didn't explain. He waited. To understand what was in that bag, you need to understand what came before. You need to understand who Frank Lucas was when he arrived in Harlem in 1946, and who he'd become by the time he stood at Bumpy Johnson's funeral 22 years later. Frank was born in La Grange, North Carolina. Sharecropper family. 6 brothers. Poverty that wasn't just about money. It was about watching your cousin get lynched for looking at a white woman the wrong way. It was about understanding that the system wasn't broken. It was designed exactly as intended. And you were on the wrong side of it. Frank came to Harlem at 19 with $40 and a hungry look that Bumpy Johnson recognized immediately. You got ambition, Bumpy told him during their first meeting. But ambition without discipline is just noise. You want to work for me, you learn the first rule, stay invisible. Frank learned. For 15 years, he drove Bumpy's Cadillac. He carried messages. He collected money. He watched and learned and never spoke unless spoken to. He saw how Bumpy operated, the alliances with Italian families, the payoffs to police, the careful balance between fear and respect that kept Harlem functioning. He also saw the weakness. The middlemen. The Italian suppliers who controlled the heroin pipeline from Europe, cutting the product 4, 5, 6 times before it reached Harlem streets. making $10 for every $1 that stayed in the community. "Why do we need them?" Frank asked Bumpy once years ago. "Because they control the supply," Bumpy said. "And until someone figures out how to go around them, we pay their price." Frank filed that information away. He was good at filing information away. By 1968, Frank had something Bumpy never quite managed, a direct pipeline. He'd made connections during the Vietnam War, not with soldiers, but with the men who moved bodies. Coffins coming home from Southeast Asia. Most of them checked, but not all. Not if you knew the right people. Not if you paid the right price. Frank wasn't just getting heroin. He was getting pure heroin. Uncut. Direct from the Golden Triangle. No Italian middlemen. No markup. No one taking their percentage except him. He called it blue magic. Purer than anything on the streets. Cheaper. Better. And entirely under his control. But control meant nothing without legitimacy. And in Harlem, legitimacy came from one source, Bumpy Johnson's blessing. Frank had been planning to ask for it. To sit down with Bumpy, explain the pipeline, request permission to operate independently. He'd been planning it for months, waiting for the right moment. Then Bumpy had his heart attack. And the moment disappeared. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still ahead. The funeral reception was at a social club on 116th Street. Tables of food. Open bar. 300 people who'd been at the church, plus another 100 who showed up afterward. Bumpy's widow, Mamie, sat in a corner booth, accepting condolences, her face a mask of grief and exhaustion. Frank stood near the bar. Not drinking. Just watching. The room was dividing itself. He could see it happening in real time. Bumpy's old lieutenants clustering together, eyeing each other with suspicion. Italian representatives from downtown standing in their own group, calculating. Police detectives in civilian clothes trying to look casual, while they assessed who would be the new player they'd have to deal with. Everyone was waiting to see who would make the first move. Frank made his move at the funeral. But these men hadn't understood it yet. They thought the bag was just a generous offering. A sign of respect. They didn't know what was in it. Nicky Barnes, one of Bumpy's former dealers, flashy and ambitious, approached Frank. Gold rings. Silk shirt. Too much cologne. "That was a nice gesture at the church," Nicky said. "Bumpy would have appreciated it." Frank nodded. Said nothing. "So what's next for you, Frank? You gonna keep driving cars? Maybe Mamie needs someone to handle Bumpy's affairs for a while." "I'm handling my own affairs," Frank said quietly. Nicky laughed. "Yeah? What affairs? You've been driving Bumpy around for 15 years. No offense, but you're not exactly." "The bag had $50,000 in it," Frank said, his voice so low that Nicky had to lean in to hear. "That's my tithe. 10% of what I made this month. To the church. In Bumpy's name. Because that's how you show respect. Not with words. With contribution." Nicky's smile faded. "You made $500,000 this month?" "No," Frank said. "I made $500,000. The 50 was my community share. The way Bumpy taught me." He let that sink in. Then he added, "If you want to talk about what's next, we can talk. But understand something first. I'm not asking permission. I'm offering partnership. There's a difference." Frank walked away, leaving Nicky standing frozen at the bar. Off camera, Frank made a choice that wasn't meant to save his life. The church bag was calculated. $50,000 in cash, more money than most people in that room would see in 5 years, donated publicly, ostentatiously, to honor Bumpy. It sent 3 messages simultaneously. Frank had money. Real money. Not driver money. Boss money. Frank understood community. The donation went to the church, not into his pocket. Bumpy's principle, take care of your people, they take care of you. Frank was claiming succession. By making the offering at Bumpy's casket, in front of everyone who mattered, he was saying, "I learned from the king. And now I'm taking the throne." But it was the timing that made it brilliant. At a funeral, you can't argue. You can't object. You can't stand up and say, "Who the hell does Frank Lucas think he is?" Not with Bumpy's body right there. Not in a church. Not in front of Mamie and the whole community. Frank had turned a moment of grief into a coronation. And he'd done it so quietly that most people didn't even realize what they'd witnessed. 3 days after the funeral, Frank got a visit. 2 Italian men in expensive suits showed up at his apartment building. Frank let them in. Offered them coffee. They declined. "We knew Bumpy," the older one said. "His name was Dominic. Soldier in the Lucchese family. We respected him. We had an arrangement." "I know," Frank said. "So we're here to talk about continuing that arrangement. With you." Frank poured himself coffee. Took a slow sip. "What arrangement did you have in mind?" "Same as with Bumpy. We supply, you distribute. We take 60%, you take 40. Everyone's happy." "No," Frank said. Dominic's expression hardened. "No? I don't need your supply. I have my own. Better quality. Better price. I appreciate the offer, but I'm going independent." The younger Italian, Dominic's nephew maybe, or a rising soldier, leaned forward. "You understand what you're saying? You're talking about cutting us out. That's not how this works." "It's how it works now," Frank said calmly. Dominic stood up. "Frank, I'm going to give you some free advice because I respected Bumpy. Don't make this mistake. The families have been patient with Harlem. But there are limits. You step out of line, you're going to create problems you can't solve." "I'm not creating problems," Frank said. "I'm removing middlemen. You want to sell in Harlem, you buy from me. Same terms you offered. But I'm the supplier now. You're the distributor." The room went very quiet. "You're serious," Dominic said. "I'm always serious." Dominic and his associate left without another word. Frank knew they'd go back to their bosses. He knew there would be conversations. Threats. Maybe attempts to undercut his supply or sabotage his operation. He'd prepared for all of it. The blue magic was already on the streets. Purer, cheaper, better than anything the Italian families could offer. Frank's dealers were under strict orders. No violence, no flash, no attention. Just quality product at a fair price. Take care of customers. Build loyalty. Let the product speak for itself. Within 3 weeks, Frank controlled 60% of Harlem's heroin trade. Within 3 months, he controlled 80%. But what happened next was the moment everyone would remember. 6 months after Bumpy's funeral, Frank was invited to a meeting. Neutral ground. A restaurant in Little Italy. Representatives from 5 families would be there. Frank arrived alone. No bodyguards. No weapons. Just his presence. The Italians laid out their terms. They wanted back in. 50-50 split. Partnership. Frank listened. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. The brown leather bag from Bumpy's funeral. Empty now. "This bag had $50,000, Frank said quietly. "I gave it to the church. In front of 300 witnesses. That was my announcement. I'm not here to negotiate. I came to tell you the terms have changed. You want product, you buy from me. Or you leave Harlem." Dominic started to speak. Frank raised one hand. "I stayed invisible for 15 years, Frank said. "I learned from Bumpy. And the most important thing he taught me was this: real power doesn't announce itself. It just is." He stood up. Placed a business card on the table. "My terms. Take them or don't. Either way, Harlem belongs to Harlem now." Frank walked out. Share and subscribe. This is how legends are remembered. For the next decade, Frank Lucas ran the most successful independent drug operation in American history. No violence. No turf wars. Just invisible discipline and pure product. The brown leather bag stayed in his office. Empty. A reminder. Power isn't what you take. It's what people give you when they realize you've already taken it.